The story kicks off with the sound of a wooden door creaking open ever so slowly. Then we see that same door, locked from the outside with a padlock. Our protagonist stares at the door, a look of pure fear on his face, and it's pretty clear he's not the least bit comfortable with this situation. Suddenly, a bright light flashes, and he looks completely terrified. Cutting to the next scene, a young woman asks why he's just standing there, without turning on the lights. She then asks if he's still afraid of the dark, even though he's not a kid anymore. Holding a box, our guy explains that his body just freezes up on its own. His wife comforts him, saying he even quit his job because of this fear. But she seems upset because they don't have any money to spare right now. Our hero then corrects her, saying he didn't quit. He got fired. Hearing this, the woman lets out a sigh of exhaustion with the whole situation. However, she changes the subject, saying it was a relief his uncle left them the house. He smiles and tells her not to worry, because he'll find another job soon. Suddenly, a boy and a dog come running by, asking where his room is. The woman then points and says the boy's room is the one on the right, all the way at the back. The boy calls out to his dog, Orzazit, and runs excitedly down the hall. She watches her son with a thoughtful look, while our hero smiles in the background. When he gets there, the boy peeks in from the doorway and asks if that huge room is really his. Our protagonist confirms it and says if he doesn't like it, he can check out the other rooms. But the boy, named Nicholas, replies that he loves the room, and his dog seems to agree. Even so, he still wants to check out the other rooms in the new house. Seeing his son's joy, a calm smile spreads across our guy's face. His wife then comes over to him and asks what kind of person his uncle was. She wonders what Uncle Edmund was like to leave such a big house to his nephew, because even though it's in the basement, the place is 5 times bigger than their old house. Being honest, our protagonist admits he doesn't remember his uncle very well either. He says he was his mother's only relative and always watched him grow up. His only memory is from when he was little and got so scared he had an accident all over him. His wife then laughs and says it seems he's been a scaredy cat since he was a kid. She then asks what his grandmother said about Uncle Edmund. Our hero looks thoughtful and seems hesitant to answer her question. Suddenly, Nicholas finds that mysterious door and gets everyone's attention. The boy thinks the door looks really old, and his dog barks at it nonstop. He also notices that it's locked with a padlock, but there's a small gap. So, the curious squishes his face against the crack to try and see inside. Through the hole, the doggo Warzazate barks furiously at whatever is in there. Our protagonist then warns Nicholas that he is not to open that door. However, his wife gets curious too and walks toward the mysterious door. She wonders if it's a cellar, and Nicholas gets super excited about the idea. But our guy panics and says they absolutely must not open it. Ignoring the warning, Nicholas yells that they have to open it to see what's inside. The dog also gets agitated and barks even louder at the door. Our protagonist then loses his cool and screams not to open the basement door. His scream is so loud that his wife and Nicholas freeze in shock. Even little Awarzazate is confused by his owner's over-the-top reaction. Our hero then repeats firmly that the basement door must never be opened. Completely lost, Nicholas asks why not, confused by his dad's behavior. Jonathan is at a loss for words, not knowing what to tell his son. His wife also chimes in and asks why they can't open the door. Stammering, our protagonist tries to quickly come up with an excuse. He then says the basement is full of rats, and his wife immediately panics. Cutting to the night, we see a full moon shining in the starry sky. The scene changes, and now we're in a flashback of our guy visiting his grandmother. Sitting at the table, he looks very worried about a letter he's reading. His grandmother explains that Uncle Edmund left this letter to be delivered to him. Our protagonist then asks her what kind of person his uncle was. Sipping her tea, the old woman replies that Edmund was always a very special child. She says that since he was little, he caused trouble by taking apart toys and clocks. The grandmother finishes by saying he even messed with the fridge and spoiled all the food. She continues, saying he built a hideout, and even his patient grandfather lost his cool. Because of that, In a fit of rage, his grandfather ended up destroying the boy's headiot. That day, Edmund's relationship with his family was completely ruined. Our hero tries to downplay it, but his grandmother says things only got worse when he became a student. Jonathan then mentions that his mother, Sylvie, always said Uncle Edmund was a genius. The grandmother smiles and confirms that Sylvie truly believed in her brother's potential. Furthermore, she also knew he wasn't just some random troublemaker. She describes him as someone who simply didn't fit in with other people. Our protagonist is confused by this "didn't fit in" description. To explain, she challenges him with a puzzle that Edmund created when he was 11. Our guy brags that he's good at these and starts fiddling with the matchsticks. But he can't solve it and, frustrated, asks his grandmother for the answer. She then begins to explain what the 11-year-old Edmund said about the challenge. The boy used to say, "You had to think differently to find the right answer." Agreeing with this, the grandmother gets up and takes a box from a shelf. Inside the box, she reveals a letter that Edmund left with a specific request. The letter was to be delivered to Jonathan Wells if anything happened to him. Our protagonist then takes the envelope with a very serious expression on his face. He stares at the paper, looking very concerned about the message's content. Cutting to the present, the new house is still a mess, full of boxes, and that mysterious basement door remains locked, with a creepy vibe to it. The next day, a bright sun shines through the window of the building where they live. Already in the morning, our hero says goodbye to his family, saying he's heading out. His wife and Nicholas complain because he has to leave so early right after the move. He apologizes and says that the person he's meeting is only free today, but our guy seems nervous, as if he's hiding something. His wife then stares at him and asks if he didn't say he needed to go out too. Ignoring the question, he warns Nicholas not to open the door for strangers. Back in the past, our hero looks at an old photo on the house wall. His grandmother says it's his mother and Uncle Edmund, and he asks how his uncle passed. The grandmother reveals that he was stung by wasps, and that the news even made the papers. Our hero falls silent, looking shocked by this bizarre information. He then asks if there's anyone else who knew his Uncle Edmund well. She says yes, and that Edmund had a childhood friend he saw frequently. Suddenly, a large, serious-looking man appears at the door of a house. Our protagonist is visibly nervous and intimidated by his presence. He then greets him, calling him Mr. Jules Brazel. Sitting down to talk, a cup of tea is served for the two of them at the table. Brazel begins by saying that Edmond Wells was a true mystery of a man. He says they studied biology together, but he graduated in botany. Meanwhile, our guy's uncle specialized in something different, which is bacteria. Brazel explains that his research was to understand the most primitive cells, because Edmund believed that humans were just a collection of cells. The friend then thinks for a moment about how to describe his uncle's personality, and finally, he concludes that Edmund was someone a little outside the norm. Looking out the window, Brazel says that nowadays he thinks about Edmund even more. Our hero then mentions that he heard his uncle was writing an encyclopedia. Upon hearing this, Brazel gives the young man a very strange and mysterious smile. Meanwhile, back at the new house, the doorbell suddenly starts to ring. Through the peephole, a shadowy, unknown figure appears on the other side of the door. The man introduces himself as new and says he's here for a bookbinding job. Suspicious, little Nicholas opens the door just a crack to peek out. Seeing it's just a child, the boy tells the stranger to come back another time. But the man insists and gives the boy a very weird look. Nicholas remains suspicious while his dog Awarz's 8 stays on high alert. Genu then asks if there are any adults and says that Professor Wells ordered the service. The boy explains that his great-uncle passed away and tries to shut the door in his face. However, the man is faster and sticks his foot in the door to keep it from closing. He offers his condolences and asks if the uncle left behind a bunch of documents. Nicholas stays silent, his eyes showing that he's very scared by all of this. Brazel gets super excited and says that this ambitious idea is classic Edmund. Our protagonist then asks if he ever got the chance to see this encyclopedia. Brazel looks at him with a serious gaze and remains silent for a few seconds. Jinnu tries to force his way in, but Nicholas stops him with all his strength. With a wicked smile, he says there must be a red file folder in the house. His eyes turn red as he reveals the name of the so-called Encyclopedia of Knowledge. Back to the conversation, Brazil asks if he wants to know if he's ever seen the encyclopedia. He answers no and explains that Edmund probably hid it like a treasure. Our hero then seems to understand the situation and looks thoughtful for a moment. With a relieved smile, he feels more at ease with the friend's answer. Meanwhile, Nicholas manages to close the door and shouts that there's nothing like that there. The man outside falls silent, looking frustrated with the situation. Our protagonist then remembers the puzzle and asks if Brazil knows the answer. He smiles and confirms that he does, as Edmund used this test frequently. Our hero gets excited, thinking he's finally going to find out the riddle's answer. To our hero's surprise, Brazil smiles and says he can't give him the answer. He explains that everyone must find their own way, and our guy gets frustrated. Changing the subject, our protagonist hands over the letter his uncle left him. Brazil then takes the envelope and begins to read the message with a serious expression. The letter says to never go down to the basement, no matter what happens. Our guy then asks if he's ever heard anything about this basement. The uncle's friend closes his eyes and seems to think deeply about the question. He then says he's never heard anything, and our hero looks very disappointed. But he adds that if Edmund left a message like that, it must be something serious. With a dark look, he warns that our protagonist must obey the order. Jonathan is quite surprised by the intensity of his late uncle's friend. Cutting the scene, we return to the house, which is plunged into the darkness of night. In the hallway, the moving boxes are still piled up near the basement door. The locked door looks even more sinister and terrifying in the darkness. Suddenly, the dog roars as it growls furiously at the basement door. Suddenly, the basement door creaks open a tiny bit on its own, making a strange noise. Our protagonist then realizes his dog is missing and wonders where he went. His son Nicholas is sitting on the floor, looking very sad, and confirms he hasn't found him. Jonathan tries to calm the boy down and tells him to keep looking calmly. But his wife appears and says she's sure Awarz's 8 went into the basement. She then points to a pile of the dog's fur right in front of the door. Our hero tries to hide his fear and says he might have gone out onto the street. His family shouts that's impossible because the front door was locked the whole time. She then hands him the padlock and tells him to use his skills from his old job. Stammering, our guy refuses and repeats that they can't go into the basement. His wife loses her patience and yells, asking why the heck they can't. Everyone starts pressuring Jonathan, but he remains frozen in fear. In a moment of panic, he has a terrifying memory and goes into shock. The woman points to the crack and says it's big enough for the dog to get through. And with a bead of sweat dripping down, our hero stares at the door, horrified. The total darkness of the crack in the door seems to swallow all the light in the hallway. Our protagonist is trembling with fear, completely paralyzed on the spot. Meanwhile, his family calls out to him, asking him to hurry up and open it. The basement door remains there, a silent and dark threat. With his face slick with cold sweat, our hero is visibly terrified by the situation. Stuttering, he tries to find an excuse to avoid opening the door. Then he suggests looking outside and even calling an animal shelter. Our guy even says that if they can't find the dog, they can get another one. Nicholas becomes furious and shouts that Orzazad is his friend and can't be replaced. His wife also gets angry and asks if he's completely lost his mind. Not knowing what to say, Jonathan falls silent, looking very regretful. The woman then says she understands his fear, but she'll go in there herself. She warns him that if he doesn't open the door, she'll break the lock herself. With no other choice, our protagonist turns and walks slowly forward. Finally, he clenches his fist, looking like he's made a very difficult decision. With a determined look, Jonathan says that he'll go down to the basement himself. His wife and son are shocked, realizing he's the one who will protect the family. So, our hero prepares himself, grabbing an iron pipe and a flashlight. He warns them not to follow him and, under no circumstances, to call the police. Nicholas, not understanding anything, asks why they can't call the police. Our guy explains that it can't happen, because they would also go into the basement, trying to play it cool. He says it's just a basement with some nasty rats, but in reality, he can't tell them the truth, or they might move out. After opening the padlock, he thinks about locking the door from the inside for safety, and so, our protagonist descends alone into the darkness of the basement. His face filled with fear, he stares at what's down there, terrified. He's trembling uncontrollably, and his wide eyes show the pure panic he feels. Through the crack, his family peeks in worriedly, and Nicholas calls his name softly. His wife then shouts his name, realizing that something is very wrong. She tells him to take a deep breath, but he remains paralyzed in a state of shock. His wife encourages him through the crack, asking if he can get through this. Sweat drips down our hero's face as he faces the challenge. Finally calming down, he takes a deep breath to gather his courage and go in. He then grips the iron pipe he's holding even tighter, exhaling. He prepares himself for whatever he might find down there. Our guy then turns to his family and says that everything is okay. He tells them not to worry and begins to descend the steps slowly. But as he takes the first step, he feels a strange chill run down his spine. Looking back, he sees his family still peeking worriedly through the door. He then continues his descent, entering the complete darkness of the basement. His wife and son watch the darkness as he disappears from sight. Our hero descends a long stone staircase, lighting the way. He stops for a moment and wonders about these mysterious stairs. Our protagonist wonders just how far these steps really go. The flashlight's beam reveals that the basement is actually a massive cave. At the back of the cave, a light illuminates a strange round, orange object. Suddenly, a long, thin lead begins to emerge slowly from inside it. Right after, more lead stretch out from the mysterious object. The creature then reveals itself to be a giant ant and steps onto the cave floor. At that exact moment, the hibernating creatures of the earth begin to awaken. Their blood, once solid, now thaws and begins to flow normally again. Their hearts then start beating again, and a warm current flows through their bodies. And even their complex joints begin to move once more. The first 12 ants that awakened gather in the darkness of the cave. They have a mission to wake the others and go out to collect heat energy. One of the ants then starts digging into something that looks like a furry body. We see that they are 1 millimeter tall in a place that is 50 stories high. This is the largest city in the region, with a total of 18 million inhabitants. Its annual production includes liters of honey and kilos of various mushrooms. Additionally, the city has a tunnel network of 120 kilometers. With a surface area of only 2 square meters, lies the city of the ants. The city is named Belokan and is a massive anthill in the middle of the woods. The 12 ants that woke up first need to restart the city after the winter. Among them is a single male capable of reproducing, and he is a little different. His name is number 327, and his destiny is to perish in a few months. The ant then shares its warmth with a worker to wake her up. Upon waking, the worker uses her antennae to identify who woke her. An ant's antennae can reveal a lot of important information. The first segment reveals the age, which in this case is 173 days. The second segment of the antennae indicates the ant's rank, which is a fertile male. The third informs of the city and species, and the fourth is her egg number. This egg number becomes her name, and his was number 327, and so the worker recognizes him as the male, 327. From the fifth segment onwards, the antennae have other very important functions. Meanwhile, 327 carries a twig 60 times heavier than himself. Suddenly, a soldier ant approaches with a new proposal for him. She invites him to go hunting, and he seems very interested in the idea. And 327 then asks what exactly they will be hunting together. The soldier explains that they found fresh meat before the winter began, and that the goal of the hunt is to find leaf, beetle meat for the colony. Our protagonist then questions if the beetles aren't hibernating. The soldier replies that this meat comes from a special, different place, an area where there is no winter and it's always warm because of the groundwater. After hearing the explanation, and 327 agrees to go along on the hunt. Outside, the anthil prepares for the new season that is beginning. 28 explorers gather for the first expedition of the season. The group looks very experienced and accustomed to long-distance journeys. They are well equipped, and the battle scars on their bodies show their strength. The group then begins to march through the forest in search of resources. They walk for hours and hours without stopping toward their objective. On the way, they pass by several sister cities of the same federation. One of them is Adelubakan, the city that produces the most grain in the entire region. There's also Geolican, which sent an army to conquer termite cities. Another is Zetabanican, a chemical lab that produces formic acid, and Libiocan, which ferments honey into an alcohol with a resin flavor. Fire ants not only live in cities, but also form federations. Bolokan is part of a young federation, 50,000 years old. The story goes that the first queen got lost in a storm. She founded Bolokan and created the federation that exists today. The group of explorers then arrives at Lasilicon, the westernmost city. Nearby, a field of grass will soon be filled with soldier ants. To the north, they spot the enemy city called Shijaifu. Fortunately, the enemies are still sleeping because of the winter. The scent trail that guided them ends, and they need to follow tracks. Suddenly, the protagonist ant screams in pain, and something unexpected happens. One of the ants in the group is captured by a treacherous, carnivorous plant, and 327 screams desperately that they need to save their comrade. But the soldier explains that once caught by the plant, rescue is impossible. The only thing they can do is leave a warning sign for the others. So the group continues on its way west, leaving the ant behind. They move forward without looking back, ignoring the danger surrounding them. Suddenly, one of the ants stops and seems to have found a new clue. She says the pheromone she smelled marks the entrance to a nearby cave. The group then finally reaches their destination and prepares to enter. Inside the cave, they find a river of flowing, churning water. As they get closer, they discover it's a hot spring with warm water. But their joy is short, lived as something strange begins to happen. A giant dark ball emerges from the water and scares all the ants. The soldier then calls for calm and reveals it's just a dung beetle. She says to let it pass, as it tastes bad and its shell is too heavy. Soon after, an Erwig appears, and the ants prepare for an attack. One of them shouts that this one tastes good, and launches a precise strike. The acid hits the Erwig dead on, and it screams in pain from the impact. With the prey taken down, the group celebrates the delicious meat they've secured. Thanks to the hot spring, many prey stay awake around there, and they feast. But suddenly, a giant shadow appears and attacks the group of ants. The mysterious creature with glowing eyes seems to be very dangerous. The soldier then points and says it's the creature they were looking for. The flying creature attacks with a sonic blast, causing massive damage. The attack sends rocks flying everywhere, hitting some of the ants. 327 panics and wonders how they're going to stop that monster. The soldier explains that it's a bat, and it's just bluffing out of fear. She then orders everyone to attack the bat with formic acid. The creature is hit squarely and screams in pain from the mass attack. The 40% concentration acid acts as a deadly corrosive. With the bat defeated, the remaining 27 ants continue their mission. They explore the warm caves and collect all the food they can find. To mark their territory, they release pheromones as if planting a flag. This chemical mark defines the new territory of the Bolokan Federation. The first expedition of the season completes its mission with total success. Outside, the sun shines brightly through the green leaves of the forest. With the collected food, the group hurries to return home before nightfall. If night falls and the temperature drops, their bodies will stiffen from the cold. From March to October, ants work nonstop, but in the cold, they sleep. That's why long expeditions are rare, and these ants are very courageous. On their way back, they once again encounter the dangerous carnivorous plant. One of the ants suggests uprooting the plant and taking it to Queen Velocuciuni. Most think the idea is too difficult and far too dangerous to risk. They argue that they don't have enough ants to carry the plant. But one of them says that controlling carnivorous plants would be a great power. But the soldier ends the discussion and orders everyone to collect the pheromones. They are exhausted, and the sun is already setting on the horizon. Finally, the group decides to give up on the idea and leave the carnivorous plant behind. They continue their journey back home through the dense forest. Along the way, one of the ants finds a yellow flower she's never seen before. Another suggests taking the flower to the Queen Mother, as she would be very happy. They decide to leave the carnivorous plant, but take the unknown flower. The ant who found the flower hurries to catch up with the rest of the group. But as she touches the flower's stem, something very strange happens to her. Suddenly, all the surrounding ants fall to the ground unconscious. The ants that didn't faint wonder what on earth is happening, and 327 panics, not understanding the sudden situation. She then smells a familiar scent that she has smelled somewhere before. 327 vibrates her antenna 12,000 times per second to identify the scent. This creates a suction current that pulls in all surrounding particles. With eyes wide with shock, she finally identifies the mysterious scent. It's the dwarf ants from Shidfu, the enemy city to the north. 327 realizes that the enemies have set an ambush with a new weapon. She understands that she needs to warn the others about the imminent danger. The ant then runs off desperately to alert the rest of the colony. The story then tells us about Bistenga, the ancient queen of the God dynasty. She sent hundreds of expeditions to discover where the world ended. But unfortunately, none of the expeditions she sent ever returned. The current queen, Velokukiuni, is far less ambitious than her predecessor. She is content with discovering little golden beetles and observing plants. And she also dreams of the day they can finally tame the carnivorous plants. The queen knows that the best way to learn is to expand the Federation. But this means constant war, which prevents territorial growth. The slow but steady progress fits perfectly with the ant's philosophy. Meanwhile, the sun sets on the horizon like a large orange egg. In the first hunt of spring, he saw his comrades get taken down. Afraid of being next, he runs desperately back home. On this day, the path back home seems especially long and dangerous, and 327 can't understand how the enemies have already woken up from winter. She runs as fast as she can, trying to escape any danger. She wonders what kind of new weapon they created for such an effective attack. A weapon capable of eliminating 26 ants without leaving a single trace. In the middle of her run, she wonders if she will make it home alive, and with that thought, she runs non-stop towards her home. Suddenly, a bright, blinding light appears in the dark night sky. The light gets more and more intense and seems to be approaching rapidly. The scene then cuts to our protagonist in the basement with his flashlight. He continues down the dark stairs with the iron pipe in his hand. With his face slick with cold sweat, he seems to be getting more and more terrified. He then continues his descent into the darkness of the mysterious basement. He tries to control himself, telling himself not to let fear take over. He then continues to descend carefully, lighting the way with his flashlight. Suddenly, he hears a noise and shouts his dog's name, Awarzazit. Without a second thought, he runs through the dark cave looking for him. He keeps calling the dog's name, but gets no response. Meanwhile, Ant 327 stops at the end of the scent trail, confused. She spots the Balokan anthil in the distance and is surprised by the sight. The top of the city under construction seems to touch the moon in the night sky. She realizes it's already night and worries about the approaching cold. The ants at the entrance tell her to come inside quickly before it gets too cold. One of them explains that the doors are closed so the cold doesn't get in. But 327 asks them to wait a bit, as she needs to warn them about the danger. She then arrives at the entrance of the anthil, trembling from cold and exhaustion. The other ants wonder what that is and call her a stray, but she identifies herself as an ant from Balokan, just like all of them. The other ants notice that she's in terrible shape and exhausted. Sensing her fatigue, a worker offers food to 327. She can barely stand, but she accepts her comrade's help. The two then share the food through their social stomach. Reinvigorated 3027 thanks her and says the worker saved her life. She then runs to report what happened and warns that it's an emergency. The other ants are confused and ask what's going on. 327 reveals that the dwarf enemies destroyed the first expedition. She then declares that the war has begun, and everyone should go to their posts. The news spreads quickly, and the entire colony goes on alert. But the other ants doubt her story and ask for concrete proof. 327 is speechless, as she has no way to prove what happened. One of the ants then asks where exactly the attack took place. 327 explains that it was west of Lasalicon, in a new hunting ground, but a soldier retorts that it's impossible, as the enemies were sleeping. The soldier insists that the spy's reports can't be wrong. The other ants accuse 327 of seeing things due to exhaustion. They think it's absurd for a war to start so early in the spring. For 327, who saw everything with her own eyes, this is unbelievable. Outraged, she asks if they think she made the whole story up. She then suggests they check the numbers and see that there are ants missing, but the other ants ignore her and continue with their normal tasks. 327 gets frustrated because no one believes her and what happened. She can't understand how they don't see such an obvious and dangerous fact. Determined, she decides she will wake up her people, no matter what it takes. The other ants tell her to stop making noise and causing a commotion. Alone and ignored, she moves away to think about her next step. The scene then returns to the present with the basement door still locked. Jonathan's wife stares at the door with a worried expression. Nicholas says 4 hours have passed and suggests calling the police. She remains silent, arms crossed, with a worried expression. The scene cuts, and we see Edmund's hand writing in an old diary. He writes that the result of his research could be something horrible, and that, as he writes, he struggles to protect his secret from the world. But he knows that no matter how deep a secret is buried, it will one day surface. He then addresses the reader, saying that by the time you read this, he will be gone. It could be 10 years from now, or maybe even 100 years in the future. He then closes his diary, titled Encyclopedia of Relative and Absolute Knowledge. The scene ends with him turning off the light on his work desk. Back at the anthill, 327 laments that no one believes her story. Desperate, she decides she must tell everything directly to the queen. She believes that Queen Velokukiuni will listen and understand what happened. The queen is experienced and has survived 14 harsh winters. 327 is sure she will understand and listen to her desperate plea. She then enters a passage full of workers carrying eggs. He passes the workers and enters a small, dark side tunnel. Thanks to his infrared eyes, he can move around without getting lost. The closer he gets to the queen, the stronger her scent becomes. He carries a scent that acts as a pass and gets through without any trouble. Finally, he reaches the last corridor that leads to the mother's chambers. A guard allows him to pass, and he politely thanks him for the permission. Suddenly, he smells the strong, irresistible scent of the queen mother. 327 is completely mesmerized and feels drawn to the scent. The queen is the only one who lays eggs and has given life to all the ants there. She has fought countless wars and even conquered the termite cities. Besides being 327's mother, she has also broken the longevity record. Queen Velokukiuni is the queen of the central city of the fire ants. She has a long head, and her antennae are strangely far apart. At her side, a nurse ant is always ready to receive new eggs. 327 uses keen sense of smell to identify the sexes of the ants. When the weather improves, the mother will lay eggs of all types for the city. The queen then calls him closer with a calm, motherly voice. 327 slowly approaches his mother, the queen of the entire colony. The queen's saliva is a powerful remedy that heals any wound. The queen then welcomes him back to the womb of the people and embraces him. As an explorer, he was the eyes and legs of the colony on the expedition. Full of hope, he asks his mother to believe what he has to say. The queen says she believes him, but there's a big problem with the story. She explains that he can't be the only one to rouse the people for war, and that's why he came to her, so she could reveal the truth to everyone. 327 is shocked to realize it could be war, or it might not be. The two then stare at each other in silence for a tense, decisive moment. The queen says she can't decide anything on her own about such a serious matter. In their city, important decisions are made jointly by a group. 327 insists that this is the most urgent matter they are facing right now. But the Queen explains that there are many other priorities for the colony at the moment. The awakening from winter isn't over yet, and the external repairs have barely begun. Besides, they need protein and sugar to prepare for the festival. And even if she wanted to, she doesn't have enough ants to send as spies. The Queen then touches one of the carnivorous plants with curiosity and admiration. She observes the plant's small green globes with great attention. 327 remains silent, looking thoughtful about the Queen's response. The Queen then says that if they build a fence with these carnivorous plants, 327 is surprised by the brilliant idea of his mother, the colony's queen. But the Queen points out that there's still a problem to be solved with the plants. She explains that the little monsters don't yet know how to tell friends from foes. 327 then questions what about the comrades who perished on the expedition. The Queen then asks how many ants perished in the so-called accident. With his head lowered, 327 replies that there were 27 in total. The Queen then asks if all the victims were from the explorer subclass. 327 then confirms that he was the only male among the victims of the attack. Hearing this, the Queen looks at him and seems to think for a bit about the situation, but instead of taking action, she simply turns to lay eggs. Suddenly, she releases a brand new egg, to our aunt's surprise. Our protagonist is completely shocked by her indifferent attitude. Queen Velacucioni then lays 27 eggs to replace the fallen. Seeing this, and 327 says nothing more, as there's nothing to be done. Completely devastated, he turns and begins to walk away from the Queen. He then continues his way alone through the dark tunnels of the Anthil. However, he stops and says that things can't end like this. He decides he needs to find out about the enemy's new weapon from the expedition, but a soldier says he can't wake the people because no one believes him. Our guy then lowers his head, looking frustrated with the situation. However, he looks up and says he'll convince them one way or another. And then he flies up and shouts that the expedition was destroyed in an ambush. But the other ants complain about the noise and say they're busy working. One of them then tells everyone to get back to work and ignore his warning. Our protagonist is shocked and can't believe no one is paying attention to the danger. Seeing that no one will listen to him, he walks away and wonders what to do now. But he decides he needs to warn them of the danger somehow and won't give up. So he crawls through the dark tunnels, looking for a solution to the problem. Suddenly, he hears a noise and realizes someone is following him closely. With his antennae, he identifies the scent of a very young soldier ant. However, he also smells a strange, unnatural scent mixed in with hers. Analyzing it more closely, he wonders why on earth she smells like rock. Suddenly, a weird red ant appears, limping through the dark tunnel. Our guy then turns and asks aloud who is there with him. A shadowy figure with glowing eyes stares at him from the darkness of the tunnel. 327 then turns and asks why she is following him like that. With a bad feeling, he decides he needs to get out of there as fast as possible. Suddenly, another red ant appears from the ceiling and glares at him with hatred. He then realizes that this one also has that same strange, rocky smell. Without warning, the creature pounces on him, throwing him to the ground. Our protagonist then realizes he's completely surrounded by them. He tries to shout that he's from the same city and they shouldn't attack him, but the ants ignore him and pin him to the ground with great force. He then says his pheromones prove he's not an enemy of the colony. The ant then approaches and begins to rub her body against his. He realizes she's trying to erase his scent and doesn't understand why. In a panic, he screams because without his scent, he will simply cease to exist. Unable to resist, he wonders if this is his end and how he will go. He then screams and asks why they are trying to erase him from the world. A bright light appears, and he thinks this is how he'll disappear forever. But suddenly, a strong earthquake shakes everything and throws the ants away. A statue then appears and asks why there is so much violence among brothers. The scene then cuts to Nicholas, watching a religious program on television. The broadcast ends and reveals that it was all sponsored by a brand of milk. The boy then asks his mother when his father is coming back from the basement. Jonathan's wife remains silent, looking very worried about the delay. Suddenly, she loses her patience and says she can't wait for him any longer. She decides to call the police, but a voice stops her before she picks up the phone. It's our protagonist, back from the basement, all dirty and holding something. His wife is furious and yells that of course she was worried. At that moment, little Nicholas starts screaming desperately and crying. The reason is that our hero is holding the body of the little dog, a Warzazate. Nicholas runs towards him, screaming his friend's name in a panic. The boy begs for the little dog to wake up, but it seems to be too late. He then collapses on the floor in complete shock at the horrible scene he's seeing. But the strangest thing is Jonathan's expression, who seems to feel nothing. His wife is also speechless and doesn't understand what happened in the basement, completely devastated. Little Nicholas continues to cry loudly on the floor. His wife then looks at him and asks, what on earth happened down in the basement? But our protagonist remains still, holding the body without saying a word. He then breaks into a bizarre and terrifying smile that doesn't fit the situation. Seeing that, the woman is completely terrified by her husband's attitude. The scene then cuts to the little dog's body, lying on a cloth on the floor. Next to his friend, little Nicholas continues to cry without stopping for a second. Our hero then suggests burying him in an expensive cemetery with a photo. The boy agrees and says his dog, a Warzazat, deserves at least that much. But Jonathan suggests getting another dog, and even picks out the Maltese breed. His wife remains silent, staring at her husband in complete shock. She watches him with a suspicious look, realizing something is very wrong. Her expression then changes, and she gets a serious and very annoyed look. Angrily, she stares at him and asks what really is down there in the basement. Our protagonist then looks away and doesn't answer her question. With a cynical smile, he lies and says there is absolutely nothing there. The woman then approaches, and the two stare at each other in tense silence. She then yells at him and asks if he has any idea what he looks like, and points to the dog, saying it looks like it went through a meat grinder. The woman then completely loses her patience and asks what happened to a Warzazat. Little Nicholas watches his parents fight with tears in his eyes. Our protagonist then kneels on the floor and puts his hand on his head. He says the basement was full of rats that attacked and devoured the dog. His wife then questions him, asking why the rats didn't attack him too. He then stands up and faces his wife with a very strange and empty look. Little Nicholas and his mother remain suspicious of their father's story. He then says the rats were scared of him because he's much bigger than a dog. But his wife yells that it makes no sense and asks what he did for 8 hours. She then points to the door and asks what the heck is in that basement. Jonathan then says he doesn't know either because he couldn't make it to the end. His wife is shocked and asks if he didn't go all the way to the end of the basement. Our hero then confirms it, saying the place just kept going down. She yells that after 8 hours, he still hadn't reached the end of the path. He explains that he stopped when he found the dog all injured and praises its bravery. While Nicholas cries, he says it's amazing how a small dog could fight for so long. But his wife remains suspicious and asks where exactly he stopped. Jonathan then uses his fear of the dark as an excuse for not having gone further. He says anyone would have turned back because he can't walk in total darkness, and that thinking of his family stopped him from walking straight to his own demise. Moved by the explanation, his wife and Nicholas finally seem to believe him. Our protagonist then hugs his wife to try and calm her down for good. He suggests sealing the door and never talking about what happened in the basement again. However, he changes his mind and says the matter isn't closed yet. His wife then stares at him, completely confused by his change of attitude. He reveals that there was an area with red walls that he couldn't get past. Next to his friend's body, little Nicholas continues to cry heavily. Our protagonist then says he's always hated the dark, and that's why he was terrified. But his eyes turn red, and he says he can't stop because he was close to the end. His wife is shocked and asks if he really wants to go back to that place. Jonathan confirms it and reveals it's the same path his late uncle Edmund followed. Hearing his uncle's name, she becomes even more confused and doesn't get the connection. He then explains that he needs to find out what the heck his uncle did in that basement. The woman is completely terrified by her husband's bizarre determination. She then begs him, saying that if he truly loves them, he shouldn't go back to the basement. Little Nicholas also becomes desperate and yells for his dad not to go down again. Our hero then stares at the floor, seeming to ignore his family's pleas. He then says there's no other way and that he needs to return to the darkness. Our guy admits that he's always been pathetic and gave up at the slightest sign of danger. He continues, saying he never finished anything dangerous and never succeeded in life. Finally, he laments for never having gone all the way and taken his chances. And because of that, he became a clueless guy who doesn't know how the world works. His wife then says he's talking nonsense and that it's not true, but he interrupts her and says he can't live in a cocoon forever. He then takes off his shirt and says the basement is his chance to break out of that cocoon. The woman remains silent, staring at him with a serious and worried expression. Suddenly, she surprises him and says that if he goes, she's going with him. But our hero refuses the offer and says this task is his alone, and that no one is allowed to interfere with his path into the darkness. He then approaches his son and calms him down, saying he'll give him a riddle. Little Nicholas looks at him with tear-filled eyes but pays attention. The challenge is to form 4 equilateral triangles with only 6 matchsticks. He then says that you need to think differently to find the right answer. The scene then reveals the 6 matchstick riddle that the boy needs to solve. Thanks to the challenge, Nicholas manages to calm down a bit from his sadness and shock, but the same doesn't work for his wife, Lucy, who remains very angry. That night, the couple had a pretty nasty fight about his decision, but our protagonist refused to say anything about the basement. The next day, he fixed the door and put the padlock back in place. He also tied the only key to a cord and put it around his neck. His wife, Lucy, and his son, Nicholas, watch the scene in silent concern. Cutting the scene, we go back to Ant 327, who is being relentlessly attacked. The strange rock-scented ants continue their merciless assault. The ground shakes and rocks fall as the fight gets more and more intense. One of the enemies then bites his head hard, trying to tear it off, but he fights back and manages to break free from the mysterious ant's claws. With a quick maneuver, he manages to escape and flies far away from the danger. 327 flies desperately through the tunnels to flee from his pursuers. He looks back, confused, not understanding why he was attacked by them. Suddenly, he stops flying and lands in a very strange and different place. The ground is all cracked, and he realizes something is very wrong there. Suddenly, the ground starts to shake, and 327 screams in pain from the impact. An earthquake then causes part of the ant city to completely collapse. In a total panic, the others release fear pheromones everywhere. Our ant then spreads his wings and prepares for the chaos that has broken out. They all scream in terror, and the danger pheromones spread through the air. He thinks the trimmer saved him, but now everyone is going to get buried alive. 327 notices that all the others are releasing the danger signal at the same time. He then feels guilty because he should have been the first one to give the warning. Without a second thought, our hero flies through the tunnel to help with the evacuation. He flies quickly to try and organize the evacuation of the entire colony. Our guy orders the workers to move the eggs to a safe place, and also yells for the soldiers to assemble in their battle units. Next, he runs desperately through the tunnels that continue to collapse. He then arrives at a place where several other ants are gathered. Our protagonist then faces a dark and mysterious tunnel in front of him. The ants stare at the ceiling, seeming to feel a strange vibration in the air. Suddenly, the ground starts to shake again, even more violently than before. A bright light appears, and a hole opens in the ceiling of the anthill. One of the ants then yells that someone is breaking the city's ceiling. The hole opens up, and something gigantic starts to enter through the destroyed ceiling. They all panic and wonder what on earth is invading their city. The creature reveals itself to be a giant human finger invading the anthill. The finger then crushes several ants and causes massive damage to the colony. Panic sets in, and all the ants run desperately away. The finger continues to destroy everything and crush the ants without mercy. One of the ants then yells for all the soldiers to attack the invader. All the ants then charge forward and attack the giant finger without fear. The mass attack seems to have no effect on the mysterious invader. The finger then moves with force, throwing all the ants away. One of them then screams in terror that it's a giant monster. One of the ants then yells for everyone to sound the alarm and protect themselves from the danger. The giant finger then smashes into the ground, sending one of the ants flying. Our protagonist, 327, is also hit by the impact and is almost crushed. Suddenly, the giant finger touches our hero, who is completely paralyzed. He then realizes the finger is wet, and the liquid drips down his body. A soldier yells for him to run from there as fast as he can. She keeps yelling at him to get out of the way and activate the emergency alert. The two of them then look up and are completely terrified by what they see. A giant mouth with bright red eyes appears to devour the finger. The creature then bites the finger hard, destroying everything around it. We see that the mouth actually belongs to a bird that ate the ants. Our protagonist and the soldier look up, shocked by the creature. The invader is revealed to be a gray-headed woodpecker, common in Korea. This species of bird lives in a huge area that stretches from Europe to Japan. The males of the species have a red patch on their head, and the females do not. The bird loves to eat ants, which is why it's often seen hunting them on the ground. It then attacks with its giant tongue, devouring all the ants it finds. With the mass attack, several ants are pulled into its mouth. Our protagonist ant is in shock as he watches the soldier get caught. The woodpecker then swallows all the ants in a single gulp. It shakes its head, satisfied with the meal it just had. The bird then attacks again with its tongue, devouring more ants. Chaos ensues, and all the ants run desperately away. One of them then declares a level 3 emergency alert. The warning spreads, and everyone panics from the surprise attack. The workers are ordered to protect the eggs, and the soldiers to prepare. An ant orders the artillery to aim for the monster's throat. They then climb onto the bird's neck to begin the counter-attack. One of them gives the final order and yells for all the others to fire. And so, they launch a mass attack with formic acid on the woodpecker. The woodpecker is confused and doesn't understand where the attack is coming from. It then screams in pain and thrashes about, trying to get rid of the ants. One of them yells for the others to keep firing without stopping for a second. They then launch more acid, burning the giant bird's skin. With the neck nerves exposed, the commander orders them to cease fire. She then orders the others to bite and open the wound even wider. The woodpecker screams in pain from the direct attack on its wounded neck. It thrashes and beats its wings, trying to shake off the ants on its body. The bird continues to struggle, but the ants don't let go. The commander then yells for them to find a way to get inside the monster. One of them finds the open wound and yells for the others to attack through there. All the ants then charge forward and enter the woodpecker's open wound. The bird screams in agony as it feels the ants entering its body. One of them then tears the skin with its mandibles, clearing the way. And so, the ants advance inside the bird for the final attack. The commander then orders everyone to stop, releasing the alert pheromones. All the soldiers then advance through the wound and enter the woodpecker's body. They navigate through the blood vessels, moving towards the brain. Along the way, they rescue the others who were swallowed by the bird. They then find an artery and decide to follow the blood flow. The commander explains that the artery carries blood directly from the heart, and so they travel through the bloodstream straight to the brain. The commander then orders everyone to prepare to attack the brain. The woodpecker screams in pain and thrashes with the ants inside its body. Another unit invades the lungs and sprays formic acid to suffocate it. The bird starts to have seizures and can no longer breathe properly. Another group climbs up the esophagus and joins those who came from the other side. The ants then begin to attack all of the woodpecker's organs. They destroy everything they find and cause massive internal damage, and so they attack and destroy each and every one of the monster's internal organs. One of the ants then dives into the pool of blood left behind. Unfortunately, she doesn't survive and sinks into the woodpecker's blood. The commander then warns them to avoid areas with blood and lymph, and also not to hit the muscles and nerves, so they don't get crushed. Another one warns them to stay away from the bile and digestive juices. The ants then navigate carefully so they don't get dissolved. The two groups finally meet near the monster's kidneys, and even with the heart still beating, they have already won the battle. With the giant invader defeated, it will now become food for the colony. All the ants in the city then climb onto the body and begin to devour it. They carry the bird's feathers and flesh like trophies of war. The builders then begin repairs on the destroyed tunnels. They will raise the rounded ceiling and fix the entire city. And so, the anther returns to normal and peace reigns once more. The story then tells us that to understand ants, we need to go back in time. Insects were the first inhabitants of Earth, but survival wasn't easy. Being small and fragile, they became easy prey for predators. To survive, some laid a huge number of eggs at once. Others, like wasps, developed powerful venoms to defend themselves. And some insects produced a horrible taste, so they wouldn't be eaten. Some used camouflage, but termites were destined to become food until they found a completely new and original solution for this. They decided to stop fighting alone and united to fight as a group. Their solution was to create a complex social organization to survive. Uncle Edmund wrote that they were the first masters of our planet, and all of this was in his encyclopedia of relative and absolute knowledge. Cutting the scene, a man says Edmund didn't have good memories of that place, but he had flashes of genius that left everyone impressed. Our hero then asks if the relationship between him and his uncle was tense. The man then explains that actually, Edmund didn't fit in with his colleagues. Our protagonist then concludes that his Uncle Edmund was a lonely guy. The man continues, saying that even with all the profit, no one recognized him. Jonathan then asks him to explain the situation in a little more detail. The man says that on every team, there's always some kind of leader or boss, but Edmund hated having a leader and couldn't stand any authority. He then says that bosses just give orders without really thinking about what they're doing, and that everyone at the company was forced to obey without questioning anything, because the company's system required everyone to follow orders. Because of this, Edmund seemed arrogant and annoyed all his colleagues. And in the end, all his colleagues hated him more than the bosses he challenged. Our hero then asks what happened when his uncle left the company. The man is silent for a moment, seeming to think about the answer. He says that Edmund had a big fight with one of the company's executives, and our guy's uncle set a trap to teach the executive a lesson. But unfortunately, no one sided with him, and everyone supported the executive, and with no other choice, he had no other option but to leave. Our protagonist then questions him, since he himself said the uncle was right. The man explains that sometimes it's better to play the coward than to take a risk. He says that Edmund had no friends and never shared a meal with anyone, and that he always seemed to live in a completely different world from others. Our hero then falls silent, seeming to process the information. He then asks why the man is confessing his cowardice to him. The man is silent for a moment, looking a little regretful. He says that now that Edmund is gone, he feels guilty about what happened, and that telling the story to his nephew might bring him some peace. Our hero then falls silent, seeming to understand the man's situation. The scene then cuts to a billboard with the same brand of milk from before. The sun shines brightly, and a blue sky opens up on the city's horizon. We then see a large building of the National Center for Scientific Research, and a voice asks if the professor met him in Africa, and he confirms it. The man says that Edmund carried deep wounds in his heart, and that after that, he dedicated himself entirely to the study of insects. Our protagonist then asks why on earth he chose to study insects. Professor Daniel Rosenfeld explains that insects have fascinated humans for a long time. He says that in the old days, everyone was afraid of fleas, spiders, and weevils, and that even though they are small and weak, Insects still threaten us in some way. The professor then reveals that in the end, our bodies become insect food. Our hero is completely shocked and speechless at this statement. The professor continues, saying that they feed on our bodies in the end, and that it's no coincidence that Beelzebub, a lieutenant of Satan, is depicted as a fly. Our protagonist then comments that ants have a better image than flies. But Professor Rosenfeld explains that it really depends on the culture of each people. He says that in the Talmud, ants symbolize honesty, and in Buddhism, materialism, and that in Africa, a tribe believes that stings on pregnant women result in babies with ant heads. Our hero then falls silent, seeming to absorb all the information. Our protagonist then mentions that he heard his uncle researched bacteria. Professor Rosenfeld smiles and says that work was just a drop in the ocean, especially when compared to his incredible research on ants. Hearing this, our hero is super confused by the professor's answer. Male Ant 327 confirms the two rock-scented attackers are gone. With that, he breathes a sigh of relief, thinking the danger has passed for now. Our hero believes they were buried, and that he survived because he has wings. But he soon realizes this is just the beginning of a much bigger problem. Since his scent was erased, now all the ants will see him as an intruder. He wonders how things got to this point and blames the two strange ants. Outraged, the insect doesn't understand why they tried to end his life. He comes to the conclusion that they must be crazy, as there's no other explanation. Then the male remembers that the level 3 alarm ants were also strange. Alone in the darkness, he becomes thoughtful, trying to understand the situation. He then realizes the two with the rock scent weren't crazy, but different. They seemed to know exactly what they were doing, perhaps due to some genetic defect. The situation is like cells that destroy other cells from the same tissue. The male recalls that the nurse ants called this cancer a disease. Therefore, that rock scent was the smell of the disease, and he needs to warn his people. One of the threats is the secret weapon of the enemy dwarf ants, and the other threat is the cancer cells from the city of Balokan itself. To survive, he needs to find the only ant who can recognize him without his scent, and that ant is his mother, the queen of the entire colony. With that, he runs to the queen's forbidden zone, as it's his only option. He remembers some words that Queen Veloqqqni left for the colony. The monarch said that sometimes the heart of danger is the safest place. With this thought in mind, the insect keeps moving forward through the darkness of the anthill. The path ahead is full of dangers, but he can't give up now. At the end of a narrow passage, he finds a wooden fortress, the Forbidden Zone. This place is a pine stump that protects the city from storms and rain. The story goes that the founding queen found termites in this place 5,000 years ago, and after a 1,000-year war, the ants of Balokan finally won. Over time, the population grew, and they followed the roots to expand the city. Now, the Forbidden Zone is the exclusive home of the Mother and Special Guards. Male 327 approaches the stump with irregular steps to avoid making noise. He moves forward carefully, hoping not to encounter any soldier ants. Getting very close to the Forbidden Zone, he continues cautiously on his path. But our hero comes across a gatekeeper ant blocking the passage. These gatekeepers are genetically selected to have large, flat heads. This way, when they block a hole, their heads fit perfectly. The insect stands there, observing the obstacle on his path to the queen. They proved their worth 780 years ago in the war against the yellow ants. Back then, all the survivors of Balokan ran to the Forbidden Zone. Then the gatekeeper ants sealed all the entrances, saving the entire colony. It took the yellow ants 2 whole days to get through these living barriers. Besides blocking the holes, the gatekeepers also bit the enemies with their mandibles. The invaders finally managed to get through, but the sacrifice of the living doors was not in vain. By doing so, they bought time for reinforcements from allied cities to arrive. Now, male 327 faces one of these gatekeeper ants and tries to ask for passage. But the guard identifies him as an intruder because he doesn't have the passage pheromone. Desperate, he asks the gatekeeper to listen and check his antennae to identify himself. The guard then ignores his request and sounds the alarm about an intruder in the forbidden zone. Our protagonist is in shock as he hears the danger alert echoing through the area. The ant then challenges him to come closer so she can attack him without mercy. In the darkness, the gatekeeper waits for her invisible opponent to approach for combat, but she's no match for him, who can see in the dark, and with no choice, he goes on the attack. With her mandibles cut, the gatekeeper ant ends up slowly losing her life. However, her body hardens and ends up blocking the entrance even more tightly. The male is speechless, seeing that the passage is now completely blocked. With no other option, he decides to use formic acid on the gatekeeper's head to clear a path. The acid begins to corrode the head of the departed ant, and smoke rises from the spot. However, her head is very thick, and he needs to spray the acid 4 more times. Finally, the substance manages to melt the exoskeleton and opens a hole in the passage. And 3:20, Seven is finally able to look through the newly opened entrance. To feel less guilty, he tries to think that he's just breaking down a door. The insect repeats to himself that it's nothing more than a door. He convinces himself that he's just breaking a door to get inside. After all, he's risking his own life to warn his people about the great danger. So, the male faces the door in his path, determined to continue. The story then goes back in time, 50 million years after the termites. The new ants were descendants of wasps and were born without mandibles or stingers. They soon realized that imitating the termites would help and built their own nests. With this, the termites felt threatened by the new competitors on the planet, and so the war between the two species began to decide who would dominate. All over the world, termite armies fought against the new ant cities. The fight wasn't for food, but for political purposes of total domination. In the beginning, the more experienced termites won battle after battle. However, the ants copied the enemy's weapons and invented their own technologies. This world war lasted an incredible 30 million years without a clear winner. It was during this time that the ants developed their decisive weapon, formic acid. Even today, the battles between the two species still continue. But now, it's very rare for termite armies to win a battle. This whole story was recorded in the encyclopedia of the late Uncle Edmond Wells. The man then turns off the light on his desk after finishing his notes. The professor reveals that Edmund's research on insects was much more important. He explains that the late uncle didn't just limit himself to research, but was very active. The scientist says it was the young man's uncle who asked to ban toy ants. Furthermore, the researcher also tried to use the insects as natural pesticides. The nephew is shocked by the idea and asks if he heard right about the pesticides. The man then explains that the idea was to introduce colonies of fire ants. He says the plan isn't so crazy, as ants have been used to control pests before. The professor mentions that in Italy and Poland, they have used the insects to fight pests. Our hero then asks if the plan was basically to make the insects fight each other. The older man says the uncle called it intervening in insect relations. He then compares insect control to human domination over mammals. But the insects defended themselves by developing immunity to all types of poison. The scientist explains that 99% perish, but the rest survive immune. These survivors then produce offspring who are born already vaccinated against the poison. Because of this, over the last 200 years, the toxicity of pesticides has only increased. So, instead of getting rid of the pests, we've created super-resistant species. The young man understands that's why his uncle wanted to use this so-called insect diplomacy. Jonathan then asks if humans really have no way of dealing with insects. Even so, he says that humans have the power of civilization and science. The professor then gives a mysterious smile and asks the young man to look around him. The professor says that ants are also everywhere and are very resilient. He mentions that in the 1945 explosion, only they and scorpions survived. With that, the scientist explains that ants have adapted even to nuclear explosions. Our hero falls silent, processing this shocking information for a moment. He then changes the subject and asks why his uncle went to Africa. The older man replies that there are ants everywhere, but not all of them are the same. He reveals that after his wife's departure, Edmund lost all will to live. The scientist believes the late uncle was just waiting for the ants to take him. The protagonist is completely shocked by this bizarre revelation from the professor. Then he explains that he's talking about the African army ants, who almost succeeded. To illustrate better, the scientist asks if he's ever seen the movie, The Naked Jungle. The young man says no, and the professor says it's an old movie and hard to find these days. He then explains that the term marabunta refers to swarms of army ants. With an excited look, the man says that when they march, they leave everything in ruins. The first sign is a humming sound, and the cries of small animals trying to flee. Then comes the sound of flapping wings and dragging legs, all mixed together. Then, some soldiers suddenly appear on top of a mound like scouts. Behind them, countless ants turn the hills into an endless black sea. The scientist compares the scene to lava from a volcano that melts everything it touches. Our hero stands there, breaking out in a cold sweat, totally intimidated by the description. The professor says their march is like a living poison flowing through Africa. One colony lays 500,000 eggs a day, forming unstoppable rivers of black acid. No animal that gets close survives. They all disappear without a trace. The scientist then compares the terrifying scene to something from the Book of Revelation. Our hero's face turns pale, and he breaks into a cold sweat from the terrible story. The man explains that they fear nothing and even make bridges with their own bodies. He says that he and Edmund were at a research station in Ivory Coast. When the invasion began, the locals would flee and put the leads of their chairs in vinegar. But the ants advanced without mercy, and God didn't seem to hear their prayers. The young man is silent, completely shocked by how terrifying these creatures are. Jonathan then asks how they managed to study such dangerous ants. The professor gives a sinister smile and prepares to reveal the big secret. He reveals that they would wait until noon to begin their research. The man recalls how they studied the ants amidst the remains of their victims. They had to wait for the sun to reach its peak and the desert heat to become unbearable. In this extreme heat, the insects literally bake and end up passing on. So, when the sun gets too hot, the army ants dig temporary nests. It's like a short hibernation, but instead of the cold, it's the heat that forces them to stop. The professor then remembers Edmund and thinks that the researcher was completely mad. He recalls the late uncle going after those ants and even looking for the queen. The researcher is referring to the queen of that horde, who lays 500,000 eggs a day. He remembers how Edmund seemed obsessed with seeing the queen and acted without thinking. Our hero's uncle would just sit in silence, looking very thoughtful. Then his colleague asks why on earth he isn't wearing his protective boots. The researcher simply replies that the boots are too small and his feet don't fit. At this, his friend becomes desperate, not knowing what they can do about it. But Edmund says there's nothing to be done and that they need to start working right away. Then he orders everyone to start digging 1 meter around the nest's entrance. With that, the whole team starts digging the earth with their tools without stopping. One of the men, already tired, says he thinks they've dug enough around there. Suddenly, they reach one of the outer chambers of the nest, full of ants. The man is terrified by the noise and sees the creatures moving like a black liquid. But Edmund orders them not to stop, as they need to find the queen's chamber soon. So the whole group continues digging, expecting to find the queen at any moment. In the middle of their work, some ants start crawling up the researcher's clothes. Suddenly, our hero's uncle shouts excitedly, saying he's finally found her. The two of them look into the hole, completely shocked by the army ant queen. They are impressed because she is 10 times larger than European queens. The professor then yells excitedly, asking them to bring the cameras quickly. An assistant runs over with the cameras and warns that the ants are getting through his boots. The professor then tells the assistant to leave, as they will take pictures and follow him out. The two are amazed by the giant queen who lays 500,000 eggs a day. Excited, The scientist approaches the edge to record the incredible army ant queen. Around the monarch, countless soldier ants stand guard, ready to attack. His colleague then notices the ants have crawled up his pants and warns Edmund of the danger. But our hero's uncle ignores the warning and remains totally focused on taking his pictures. One of the creatures crawls onto his shoulder, but he doesn't seem to care about the imminent threat. The researcher then warns his friend to be careful, as they can get inside their bodies. His friend panics and tries to stop the insects from entering any opening. He explains they learned to breathe like in yoga to avoid attracting the ants with sweat. Edmund agrees and tells them to stay calm and observe the queen and her army. Meanwhile, the assistant and the other researcher watch the scene, completely terrified. One of them then loses his patience and yells for the two of them to get out of there immediately. The scientist finally realizes the danger and is left breathless, completely frightened. He then notices he's covered in ants and throws the camera for someone to catch. The whole team then helps him get rid of the creatures while he screams in terror. After the scare, everyone looks into the hole and notices something very strange happening. But the scientist just gives a look as if he knew what was coming next. Our hero's uncle remains in the hole, taking pictures without a care in the world. Seeing this, his colleague gets desperate and screams Edmund's name with all his might. The whole team rushes to help and pulls the researcher out of the dangerous hole. They then remove the man's clothes and use a knife to clear the ants from his skin. With a large knife, they remove the insects clinging to his skin, piece by piece. The professor remembers the terror and how it was worse for Edmund, who was without boots. Our hero's uncle was so shaken with fear that he just stood there, stunned. Our protagonist then comments that his uncle really didn't have much luck in life, but the scientist disagrees, saying that he was actually lucky to have survived that. Even after that scare, Edmund's interest in ants only grew stronger. Curious, our hero asks what happened after that whole incident. The professor says that after they returned to Paris, he lost contact with Edmund. He never heard from his friend again, not even through their old friend Rosenbelt. The scientist then reveals he only found out about Edmund's passing from the newspaper. With his hands together, he says a prayer, asking for his friend's soul to rest in peace. But our hero interrupts him, saying that perhaps those who need peace are the ones who are living. The professor then looks up, seeming to reflect on the young man's words. Not understanding at all, the protagonist asks what he meant by that comment. He complains that 30 degrees Celsius in April is unbelievable and that France is going to turn tropical. But he claims that this is already happening and that entomologists know it well. He mentions a moth that used to only exist in Madagascar and has now appeared in Paris. The young man falls silent with a grim look on his face, seeming very uncomfortable. The professor then finishes by saying that if that were to happen, total chaos would break out